I'm really excited to be doing this today. This is the end of the month for our October Dream School live course. And every Saturday we do office hours at the same time. I wanted to bring in a special guest every month. And so for this month, I chose Rafael, or maybe he picked me, because we've been moderators together at the Jung subreddit for quite a while. And I want to give my students an idea of a different approach to engaging with dream images. I teach the knowledge and methods of dream interpretation and analysis, starting with sort of the psychology of it with Freud and Jung and Adler and all that, and then running up through the traditions of dream interpretation, or what we call dream work. And so Jung, of course, is a huge figure in the psychology and understanding of dreams. And when you dig into his early work, you see a lot of him like the doctor at work, the scientist, the theorist who's making these observations, taking it into clinical practice, and then pumping out knowledge to teach other people about how to interpret dreams. Man and His Symbols for me was a turning point in my understanding of dream imagery because it taught me how to decode the language of dreams, that symbolic language. But then I ran across active imagination technique. And in this, Jung would just engage with the dream images and let them speak for themselves. So the active imagination is a space that you go into where you can meet these figures from the unconscious that come to you in dreams, and they can also come to you in sort of meditation. Uh, they can arise spontaneously, and you can invoke them. You can go into a space within yourself and say some kind of welcoming, I'm here, I want to engage with you. And now you have this conversation. And I found that it can work very similarly to dream work, but in a more powerful way. I found people who made these sudden leaps of understanding in what certain images, whether it be characters or symbols or even settings, that you engage with. It's similar to Gestalt, but I think Raphael here is going to tell us that there are some important differences. So, with that, Raphael, will you introduce yourself to our participants?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for your invite. I'm Rafael. I've been working as Jungian therapist for about 4 years now. I also have a past with coaching, other kinds of therapy, as a meditation teacher. The list is a bit long. And but I first learned about Jung, I think it was about 8 or 9 years ago, but only started to seriously study it about 3 or 4. Then I underwent training, did Jungian analysis and all the things you have to do. And for active imagination, I've been practicing it for over 3 years now, some periods daily and some periods a few times per week. But since I started, I never stopped. And as Jason said, it is a very powerful tool because it allows you to fully engage with the unconscious. It puts you in control to sort of meet these inner figures that are representations of your psyche. So yeah, let's go over that. I was just thinking that I never, how do I share my screen here? It's the first time I do it via Zoom.
I wonder if I have to give you hosting powers here.
I see, let's go.
Allow. There we go. Okay. Thank you. Made it easy for me trying to figure out these buttons on the fly. I'm still kind of a newbie to Zoom, to running the show. So the show is yours. It says that you have the power to now share your presentation with us.
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, guys, just bear with me for a moment.
Yeah, that's all right. I was noticing on your bookshelf behind you, you have a copy of the Red Book, and I've also dug into that. This was a work that Jung did, was never meant to be shared publicly. A beautiful book in itself. And it's basically a chronicle of his engagement through active imagination with these figures from the psyche. Uh, I often recommend that people get a background in his work first before they dive in, because the Red Book is probably the deepest of everything that he wrote. And this is a man who was wrote some very deep stuff. So if anybody's interested as they get the hang of active imagination, uh, the Red Book will be kind of the pinnacle of that work, at least as far as I'm concerned, because of its the depth that he goes into and the personal relation of what he found when he engaged the unconscious. It is absolutely amazing what he, yeah,
Huh.
but I'm sure
It
we'll
is
get some.
working.
Good. Okay, here we are. So Rafael Krieger, thank you. Let's you go ahead and take it away.
All right, let's go. I can see I have this, my little face is in the corner. It's a bit weird. Let's go.
It's
So yeah, as Jason was telling us, the Red Book is the book where Jung recorded his experiences with his own unconscious. And this one is actually, let's see if I can show you guys. It's not actually a copy of the Red Book, but it's one of the editors of the Red Book. I went to one of his conferences last year in Argentina. His name is Bernardo Nantes, and he was explaining Jung's process to creating this book. And he says that the most important thing in Jungian psychology, and I agree, I learned that in my training too, is something called the symbol formation process, which basically means creating our unique sense of meaning. So this would be the main message of the Red Book. And Jung was heavily influenced by Nietzsche, and he shares a very interesting statement. God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. Of course, that when Jung uses the term God, he's not referring to a metaphysical being, the bearded guy on the sky, but he uses that in a psychological sense, which means that what is the thing that brings meaning to our life? What is the thing that can structure our whole psyche? And for some people, this can be money, this can be a relationship, this can be their job, they can be a workaholic, they can have some vice or addiction. So anything that structures your psyche and has this power over you, that's what Jung calls God. And when he borrows his statement by Nietzsche, he's saying that religion can't provide the sense of meaning anymore for a lot of people. Because before people would engage through religion with the unconscious, with God, and have the religious experiences, as religion is a way to elaborate the unconscious experiences. And since the positivistic paradigm, we don't have this relationship with religion anymore. So that's why Nietzsche says that God is dead and we have killed him, with our excessive rationalization and our lack of connection with our own souls and the unconscious. And Jung found his way through these active imagination experiences, and as Jason mentioned, he recorded them on the Red Book. So Jung was really trying to, let's say, establish a new connection with his own soul and a new and unique sense of meaning through these experiences. Because when we don't actively engage in this process, we are subject to what Jung calls substitute gods. And he says this: man is free to decide whether God shall be a spirit or a natural phenomenon, like the craving of a morphine addict, and hence whether God shall act as a beneficent or a destructive force. So basically, we get to, quote unquote, establish our connection with our God image within and understand what is the thing that can bring us a new meaning through the connection with the unconscious. Because when we don't do that, the substitute gods can take over, like the greed, sexual fantasies, and various forms of addiction, because these things kind of take a hold on us. And Jung goes even further and says that his psychology is really concerned with the numinous in your lives, which means the experiences with the unconscious, because he says the unconscious is perceived as a religious factor. The experience of the unconscious is perceived as this religious factor. So that's numinosum and religious experiences are kind of the same thing. So when you can take someone to create their new sense of meaning, this would be the symbol formation process for them. And this is always individual. This is always a unique experiences. And again, when Jung uses the term God, he's referring to this psychological aspect of our psyche, the thing that can structure our whole life. And let's see, individuation. So far, so good. Any questions?
Yeah, that's all good here. I'll just want to say to participants that as long as, we don't all start talking over top of each other, I've said that you can unmute yourself. I mean, and I told Zoom that all participants can unmute. You can also go into the chat, and I will open it up right now. So what I would say as far as organizing this is if you have a question and it's while Rafael is talking, please feel free to put it into the chat. I will monitor the chat and then act as moderator to feed those questions to you when you have little breaks like this, Rafael. Thank you.
All right. I imagine everyone's familiar with the concept of the shadow here, right? Let's go over that because I want to make like a quick introduction to a few Jungian concepts, and then we're going over the procedure of active imagination. And one of the most important things in Jungian psychology is some Carl Jung calls conscious attitude. And this is basically how a person is wired. Is their beliefs, their core values, our individual predispositions, and also our typology. So introversion, extroversion, and if you're guided by one of the four functions, be it thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition, and also a logos or eros orientation. So it's basically someone's modus operandi. So this would be like our lenses, the beliefs, the filters we use to interact with the world, engage in our relationships, make our interpretations. It's basically how we work. And this is the most important concept in Jungian psychology because it says the conscious and unconscious have a compensatory and complementary nature. So this means that whatever is in our conscious mind, we will find its counterpart in the unconscious. So I can give you a very simple example. So if someone's very logical, very rational and processual, the counterpart would be feelings and emotions. So this would be in the unconscious. And our conscious attitude always has the tendency of being unilateral. So it's kind of this little guy here with the lantern. It's kind of a focal point. And everything that isn't in this focal point will go to the unconscious and won't be able to come to the surface. So in the case of someone being extremely rational, feelings and emotions won't be able to come to the surface. And this will form the shadow. So everything that can't become conscious because of our conscious attitude will form our shadow. So it's not only made of repressed things, but also things that could never become conscious in the first place, because our conscious mind has this tendency of being unilateral. And these things are the ones that will form our shadow. And a very simple way to understand this is everything that we judge as bad, inferior, or is simply incompatible with our worldview and beliefs will go to the shadow. So one thing that most people have a problem with would be anger, because we have this tendency of judging expressions of anger as something bad. So most people will repress this, and this will go to the shadow. But there's one thing that happens with the shadow, is that it has this possessive quality, something that is not under our control. So this person will be susceptible to bursts of anger, for instance, or the person will become passive aggressive. Because it can't show it in a mature way, the shadow will come out in other ways. When he feels triggered, when he feels overwhelmed, this anger will come forth. With the shadow, is everything all right?
Yeah, everything's looking good on this end.
All right.
You're coming through loud and clear. It gets a little glitchy every once in a while, but I think that's we've gotten used to the way that this technology isn't perfect. So But for the most part, 95% of what you said has come through crystal clear.
All right, so now let's take one step further, because everyone talks about a shadow, but few people talk about complexes. And complexes are kind of the main thing in Jungian psychology, because the personal shadow is mainly made out of complexes. The inner figures we see in our dreams, for instance, or during active imagination, this would be a visual representation, or as Jung would say, a personification of these aspects. So, for instance, the anger I mentioned before could be perceived as a character in our dreams acting, and having these bursts of anger, because the unconscious, we always find the unconscious personified. And as Jung says, it's not we who personify the unconscious, it's just what happens. It's just the nature of the unconscious. So these aspects that are repressed, that are in our shadow, are these complexes. And I brought a few examples here for us to analyze. We have Fight Club, Bruce Banner and the Hulk, and Dr. Jekyll and Hyde. With Bruce Banner, for instance, if we analyze his conscious attitude, we'd say that he's an introverted thinking guy. And he's very coward, he's very passive, he doesn't show any emotion, he's basically a coward, he's afraid, he doesn't take any initiative. So this would be his conscious attitude. Obviously, I'm simplifying things a bit. So what happens is that this generates an unconscious counterpart that would be the Hulk. So the Hulk could be the representation of his shadow. That is this beast, full of anger, rage, impulsive, that doesn't think, it just acts. So we can see that in movies, films, and TV series, these complexes are all represented in some form or another, even if people know nothing about Jungian psychology. We have the same thing with Fight Club. The narrator is so introverted that we don't even know his name as well. And he's also a passive guy. He's also not taking any initiative in his life. Throughout the movie, we see that he's kind of a loser. So what happens is that there's a compensation in his unconscious that creates Tyler Durden, his megalomaniac guy. Right? So his power complex, that is unconscious, comes forth in the unconscious as a compensation for his conscious attitude. So this would be the main thing in Jungian psychology, understanding someone's conscious attitude and what the unconscious will be compensating through that. And why the unconscious attitude is so important? Because we can't manipulate the unconscious. We don't even know what is the unconscious. It's unconscious. It's simply as that. What we can do is transform our conscious attitude, transform our beliefs, transform how we judge this material from the unconscious, and from it, we can create more harmony within. And everything that is unconscious is first encountered projected. So everything that doesn't have a relationship with the conscious mind will be projected. So let's see if I have a few examples here. Oh yeah. So for instance, if someone has intimacy issues and have problems establishing relationships, and he's more of the avoiding type. So every time there's display of emotion, this person tends to end the relationship. What happens is that this will be projected on the other person. If the person isn't aware that he is the one cutting the relationship, he will project that on someone else, and he will blame this other person. He will think that the other person is running away, instead of realizing that he is unconsciously acting in a way that prevents the relationship, from becoming more serious. So what happens with complexes is that they create certain narratives in our minds, and we kind of live in this inner theater. This example I just mentioned would be proof of that. So if I have certain beliefs in my mind that relationships shouldn't last, for instance, that feelings is something bad, that resolving conflicts is something bad, and I always avoid these things, I will project that on someone else, and I will find a way to make sure this story happens. How? Well, you might go for someone emotionally unavailable. You might go for someone that's already committed to someone else. You might feel attracted to, someone who's already in a relationship. Obviously, everything happens unconsciously. But with complexes, we always live the same narratives over and over again. It's like it's a pattern that repeats in our lives.
So when those figures show up in an active imagination session, it would be similar to a dream, and you would be like, how have you ever seen how a figure like that would take form in an active imagination session? How would
Yeah,
you
sure.
identify it?
Well, you would usually see a character with these beliefs talking to you during active imagination. You might have big experience. Yeah, let's say with this example I gave you. During active imagination, you might encounter a figure that will hold these beliefs, and they will talk to this figure, and he will tell you exactly what I told you. Like, I feel like expressing my feelings is something bad. I feel like I'm not desirable. I feel like no one likes me, and that's why I don't show my authentic self. And these figures really talk like that because these are the thoughts that go through our mind, but we're not aware. And during active imagination, you can have this direct conversation with them, and these beliefs and this way of thinking will come true in the paper or like a voice in your mind. And what happens is that now you have the chance to address these fears and talk with this part of you and maybe offer new perspectives, maybe offer a new way of doing things. And because it's kind of you're engaging in a therapy session with yourself. So you have to challenge these beliefs, understand why they're there in the first place, and try to reach an agreement with this figure. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, you sure did. I just wanted to point out the reason why I interjected there was because these figures at first can be very difficult to see yourself in them because they do come in this compensatory stance to the conscious, attitude. And so initially there can be a lot of friction and misunderstanding. But by cultivating a conversation with them and being there willing to listen, they'll tell you through they'll tell you what they really are, either directly or you can observe the way that they talk and behave and present themselves to you and kind of recognize them that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I'd like to make a point here as well about integrating the shadow, about how we should integrate these aspects. Because there is this illusion, mostly with shadow work practices, that you just fill out a prompt of questions and this is your way of integrating the shadow. And like answer a few questions will basically do anything. That's not how we integrate the shadow. So let's go over that now. Integrating the shadow entails developing and exerting what's been hidden in a mature way. With anger, for instance, one way to express anger in a healthy manner would be learning how to say no, placing healthy boundaries, asserting yourself instead of not saying anything. Instead of running away from these feelings, you have to take different behaviors. So you integrate the shadow by taking these different behaviors and learning how to do things in a different manner. And one thing Jung uses to understand the symptoms, to understand complexes, are basically two questions: why and what for? So Jung tried to unite both Freud's and Adler's perspective. So with Freud, we always look to the past. We see something going on and we try to find the origins of it, like mostly in their childhoods and with the relationship with our caregivers. So we always look to the past and look for a cause. And Freud said that once we establish a connection with what's happening in the present moment and the past, we can kind of gain some insight. And from this insight, we can maybe stop doing what's happening and find a cure for it. But Jung says that this is only half of the equation, because we also have another way of looking at things, that instead of looking at the past, we can look at the future. It's like goal-oriented. That's why Adler also broke up with Freud, because he had a different way of viewing things. And I will give you an example. So I think we all did that as a kid. At least I remember I did. A few times I just didn't want to go to school. And the only way my mom would allow me to stay at home would be if I was sick. And one day this happened. I was really sick, like for real. And she said, okay, you don't have to go to school. And I don't know, a few weeks later, I can't remember exactly how long, I used that same tactic. But this way I was pretending to be sick. So I was faking a symptom so she would let me stay home because I didn't want to go. So with the symptom, it's goal-oriented. We try to understand what the person is trying to gain with the symptom. So by faking being sick, I was trying to not go to school. So it's goal-oriented instead of looking at the past. And many people will carry the symptoms to adulthood as well. When they have a big project ahead of them, this thing can be triggered and they become physically sick. Obviously, this is an unconscious process, but they get physically sick, like for real, let's say, to avoid dealing with what they have to do. And in this case, Adler's perspective would be way better than Freud's, for instance. I can give you another example. So someone who has codependency behaviors. If we take Freud's perspective, we'd go through the childhood and analyze how did this person learn this? And we might understand that they had parents with narcissistic tendencies, for instance. And they learned that they have to cater to their needs. They had this codependent response that they have to do everything for them. They didn't have much of a choice. They didn't have a voice, and they did everything to please them. So that's how they learned these codependent traits. But with Adler's perspective, we can also argue why in the present moment this person is holding these behaviors. And it could go something like, well, he doesn't want to take any responsibility for their lives. Because when you have someone to make these choices for you, you don't have to make any choice. So you can form a relationship with your partner like this. You project the responsibility of making choices onto them. And that's why, and in that way, you don't have to take any responsibility for major decisions. And that's why you keep these codependent behaviors. So it's always a paradox. And we have to understand what is the best way to go in each scenario. And I brought a few examples from my active imaginations as well that we can go over.
Yeah, I would love to hear that. So to summarize, Freud would look towards the past for why something is manifesting in a person presently, whether some complex difficulty, behavior, emotional dysregulation, or something like that. Whereas Adler would look more of like, well, what is this behavior for, and what does it do for you? What kind of strategy is being a personal strategy is showing in this. I'm reading a book right now about anxiety from a medical doctor. And one of the things he teaches you to do is to understand that anxiety is a way of motivating yourself or other things that it might be doing, that there's actually a strategy involved with it. And I know after reading the book that I realized that when I start feeling anxious, it's often because I feel like without that anxiety driving me, that I'm going to not do the things that I need to do. So anxiety then becomes something that is almost like a crutch. I nurse it in a way to provide energy, but it's energy that drains me in the long run. So obviously I need to figure out a way of, motivating myself without necessarily having to drive myself with anxiety. But just wanted to clarify that for the listeners when you talk about the why and the what for.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. Very good summary. So I brought 3 examples that we can go over. This happened a couple of years ago. This was a period in my life where I was studying a lot. was, yeah, I was finishing my second post-graduation in analytical psychology, and everything I would do would be read. Like I would spend like 4, 5, some days 6 hours reading Jung's works, reading books, books, only reading. I stopped playing my guitar. I stopped with my other hobbies. I wasn't engaging much my relationship, and I wasn't paying much attention to my friends as well. That was my focal point at the moment. So why this is important? Because to understand a fantasy, we first have to understand someone's conscious attitude, what's going on in their life in the present moment, because without this, it's impossible. So this was my conscious attitude at the moment, obviously in a simplified way. So at this moment, I was also practicing active imagination, and I saw this huge alchemical book. Like there was a guy holding this book with a lot of figures, tarot cards, and whatever, a lot of things. But everything was kind of dark, except for one spot that had light in it. And I heard, quote unquote heard on my mind, that was only focusing on a small part of life. That would be these books. I was extremely rational at the time. I was thinking most of the time, not connected with my body, while there is this whole book for you to explore. So that's what I heard at that moment. And there's also this guiding figure that I would engage with that took the form of a dragon. And then at that time I asked for his help, like, okay, what should I do? And he transformed himself into a lantern. And then we walked into this forest the book was showing. And I saw this woman running away, right? And I heard that I would have to go after her. It's a very simple imagination, right? But that's when the interpretation comes in. Because what it meant for me at the moment is that I wasn't engaging with art. I wasn't engaging with the other things that brought life. I wasn't engaging with my relationships. I wasn't engaging with the eros aspect of life. And this would be the more rational and symbolic interpretation. But for me to integrate this aspect into my life meant that I had to take new habits, that I had to take new behaviors. And that was the moment I started playing my guitar again. I started getting in touch with my creativity again. So there's kind of a calling from the unconscious. Because before I became a therapist, I actually went to music school and I studied classical guitar. But I had completely stopped. I kind of closed this door on my life. And this was asking to come back. So we don't integrate the shadow only in our minds. We have to ask ourselves, okay, how can I fit this interpretation, this symbolism in my actual life? How can I take action to integrate this aspect? And again, from this point on, I started playing my guitar every day again. Make sure I was engaging in my relationships. Make sure to make time to these other hobbies and not study so much. So to integrate the shadow, it takes time, obviously, because these aspects come in this embryonic form, and we have to nurture these aspects. So we have to give them time so they can become a part of our personality again. And now, 2 to 3 years later, I've composed a lot of new songs. Now, this creative aspect was really embodied. So much so that I had another interesting dream about it about a month ago. So I was doing this article and I also composed this new song through this active imagination experience. And I was wondering if I would share this song, because honestly, I had many experiences that brought shame. Like with my creativity, with singing, with playing music, I never felt I was good enough. So I was always hesitant to show my creations and also to show my articles, give presentations and all of these things. So in my mind, I was hesitant. It was like, I don't know, man, probably I shouldn't do it. But then I had a dream in which I saw myself, I think it was something like 20, 25 years in the future. And in this dream, I was really sad and I was feeling defeated because there wasn't time anymore for me to develop this creative aspect of my personality. So in the dream, I saw myself 25 years into the future, showing that I never took this step, showing that I never took action. And that's the thing that would happen. I would feel sad, my heart would be broken, and I would be filled with regret. So that's what the unconscious showed me. Again, how did I integrate this aspect of my personality? Well, I took the courage and I uploaded this video to my YouTube channel so everyone could see. So integrating the shadow is practical. It's not an intellectual exercise. How's that so far?
Yeah, excellent. I'm monitoring the chat. We don't have any questions. I gave him a link to your website.
No,
and
thank you.
I promised them that we're going to have a little demonstration at the end. Understanding the active imagination session can take more time than what we have here, but that at the end that maybe we can take 10 minutes to sort of drop into the space. You can guide us into the space where we can then start engaging with the figures from the unconscious.
All right. And as Jason said, if anyone has any questions, you can raise your hand, type in the chat, and we can go over them. So now that we have a proper introduction of what complexes means, what is the shadow, the conscious attitude, we can go over the step-by-step to perform active imagination. And one thing we have to go over is how Jung understood the active imagination space and these figures of our imagination. Because Jung was really against treating the unconscious fantasies as something esoteric and metaphysical. As Jung says, it is really my purpose to push aside without mercy the metaphysical claims of all esoteric teaching. To understand metaphysically is impossible. It can only be done psychologically, either for strip things of their metaphysical wrappings in order to make them objects of psychology. So I had to remember that Jung was a psychologist, after all, and he understood these things through a psychological framework. I mean, if we want to have our own beliefs, that's completely fine. We just have to understand how Jung viewed these things. So he adopted an agnostic attitude influenced by Kant. And this means that we can't really know what things are in their essence, be it a spiritual experience or be it something material as well. So if we have this idea of God in our minds, for instance, it's a metaphysical thing, right? We don't know what God is in its essence. We can talk about it, we can have our beliefs, but we don't know what it is. It's like, what is it? It's impossible to know. And he says that the same thing happens with matter too. I have this book in my mind over here, in my hands over here. We can, understand the chemical process that went over to create the pages of this book. I know nothing about that, but let's say we can do that, the molecular structure of the book, and get real nerdy and geeky about it to say what is this book. In the end, we don't know what is the essence of this book. We don't know what the thing is, like the nature of a book. We don't know what this thing is in its essence. So Jung comes along and says that we can only experience things through our psyche. So be it a metaphysical or spiritual experience or our experiences with matter, we can only engage with them through the psychic images we perceive in our minds. So this, he says, would be the psychic reality. So regardless of the experiences we have, be it mediated through the five senses or spiritual experiences, we have these experiences through our minds, through our psyche. And this would be the psychic reality, because again, we don't know what a thing is in its essence. So it's mostly saying that we don't know what the unconscious is. We have experiences with it, but we don't know what it is. We don't know when it starts and when it ends. And moreover, he also structured his theory around something called learned nominalism. So when he uses words like shadow, the animus and anima, and the different archetypes. He's not saying that the animus and anima are a real entity. He simply chose a name to explain something that tends to happen in our minds. He's not saying the anima is real. He's not saying like the shadow is real. The shadow is an entity that you can talk to and touch. He's simply using a term to help us navigate the psyche, because men tend to have this feminine figure in their minds. And he said this, and he saw this repeatedly. And he kind of mapped how this figure tends to behave, and he chose to call it the anima, to help us see, oh, okay, this behaves in this way. It usually has this shape, usually has this feminine vibe to it, so call it anima. But again, it's just a name to help us understand these figures. So this is important because Jung wasn't saying that he was talking to spirits, he wasn't talking to aliens on anything. He really understood things through the psychological framework. And again, spirits to Jung would be the complexes we just discussed, because everything that doesn't have a relationship with our conscious mind is perceived as a complex. And if something is really repressed, really detached from our conscious mind, we might perceive this as something completely external that is pulling the strings. When we have an outburst of anger, for instance, and after a while we ask ourselves, wow, I don't know what happened. This thing just took over me. This thing completely external to me is pulling the strings. I can't even recognize myself like that. So it feels there is something external. Now, was this clear? Because I never know if I can explain this thing like in a simple way or not.
Yeah, I think so. And without getting into quantum physics or anything, when we talk about not really knowing what the thing is of itself, my mind first went to the fact that everything in matter is made up of these particles that we have ideas about how it works, but um, everything that we perceive in the world is really electrical signals that are being translated through the senses by the brain. And I think that what Jung is saying here is that they're also uh, that these things are part of our psychological reality, but their objective reality, we have no way of knowing them beyond our own subjective, reality of what the subjective psychological reality of what they are, how we perceive them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly
And don't
that.
get too caught up in terms like animus and shadow and things like that. Um, don't get too caught up in that, trying to figure out what the reality of them is, because you can get lost in minutia. Would you say that that's true? Because I'm extrapolating.
No, that's a good point. I just shared an example where I saw a woman in my active imagination. What a lot of people will do is, oh, this is my anima, problem solved. I try to rationalize things. But as you said, we have to take the reality of things. This is not my anima. This is a figure, a representation of the feminine aspect in my psyche. And to me, it meant get in touch with art again. So the reality for me would be get in touch with art again. It's not an anime,
I figure. Yep.
All right. So with active imagination, it's important to differentiate what is active imagination from other traditional methods, such as other kinds of meditation and other kinds of journaling. Because the difference is in the active part. Jung says it is a dialectical procedure between the conscious ego and the unconscious perspective. And for it to happen, our ego complex must be engaged in the process. And with hypnotherapy, for instance, or guided meditations, what happens is that we learn to detach from our thoughts, detach from our bodily sensations, and not to engage with these images that come forth. It's really a way to observe the thoughts and just let it go, let it go, let it go. So there is nothing active in this process. And with guided meditations, it's the same thing, because there's not something that's coming from the individual, that there's someone else guiding you and making suggestions, telling you a story. So it's not a spontaneous fantasy arising from me. I'm being guided, and again, I'm not confronting this material. I'm just passive in this process. So the word active really means that we engage with the figure, we engage with these images in our minds, and we have to question them. We have to ask questions. We can propose different things, and we have to understand how they fit in our lives. The active part again. And another interesting thing is that we always use the word image, but they actually have 4 layers. Jung structured the psyche around the 4 functions: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. So when we use the word image, we are really referring to 4 things, actually, because there is a thinking pattern, beliefs associated with the unconscious. The unconscious comes in our speech. We say a lot of things that we are not aware of that we're saying, and when someone reflects it back, we're like, wow, did I really say that? Do I really think in that way? Because the unconscious is expressed in our speech. The unconscious can be expressed in emotional reactions as well, through bodily sensations, and also in symbolic form. The problem is that people always focus on the symbolic form. But the thing is, not many people have a relationship with the symbolism in their minds. Not many people can see these figures in their imagination, and therefore they think they can't do active imagination, but that's not true. Because we can do active imagination by hearing something in our minds, for instance. When a thought comes, we can have a feeling in our bodies, and then we can take pen and paper and understand what this feeling is trying to tell us. We can have bodily sensations and never, quote unquote, see anything in our minds. Because again, psychic images have 4 layers. Sometimes when doing active imagination, I'm not seeing anything, but I have this tightness in my chest. And when I have that, we're like, okay, there's something wrong. And then I grab my journal, and then I kind of let it come to me what's going on. And now let's go over the procedure. One thing that few people know is that Jung didn't explain very thoroughly the process of active imagination throughout his books. He told Barbara Hanna and Marie von Franz to give these explanations, and you can find them in the book Encounters with the Soul by Barbara Hanna, and in the book Psychotherapy by Marie von Franz. Obviously, there are a lot of texts throughout their books, but these would be the main ones that are really straightforward and give you a step-by-step, because Carl Jung never gives you a step-by-step. So the first step to perform active imagination would be, it's weird that I can't really read my own slides here. Okay, so as we know, first one must empty one's own ego consciousness, free oneself from the thought flow of the ego. So this is very straightforward. The first thing you have to do is allow our minds to calm down. And this is where traditional meditation techniques can be really helpful. If you're accustomed to practice meditation, calm yourself and, slow your breathing. Because we're trying to achieve this relaxed but focused and alert state at the same time. It's kind of when we just woke up. This is the state we're trying to match here. Because this is when the unconscious is more active. As Barbara Hanna says, the first step is to learn, so to speak, to see or hear the dream while awake. Why does she say dream? Because to Jung, the unconscious is always active. There's always this dream going on in our unconscious mind. And during active imagination, while we are awake, we are trying to see this dream. We allow this dream to come forth.
And I think this is,
yeah, go on.
Rafael, sorry. The real power of active imagination that I found is that it allows me as in an ego consciousness to engage with the unconscious in a way that I can't do while I'm dreaming. I tend to be kind of so engaged with the dream that I'm immersed or submerged in it. Sometimes might be the better term for it. And I find that when I wake up, I go, well, darn it, why didn't I think to do this or ask that or question this? And so, what I start with the dream image as a starting point during active imagination, and now I do the procedure, clear the mind, and then bring up that place that I was in during the dream where I can engage with that figure. And now all of me is there instead of while I'm dreaming, where it seems like the rational thinking part of me tends to recede into the background and the emotional instinctive part of me comes forward. And I never really have time to engage with the content of the dream in that deeper way where I can bring all of me to the process. So for many people who may be like me, who I mean, I've studied dreams for years, but then I get into a dream and I know people who can go, they can be lucid, they can like feel, have out of body experiences, they can walk into the
Hmm.
dreams of other people, they have, or just having fantastic experiences like something right out of myth and folklore. And me, I get into my dreams and I'm like, well, here I am at the restaurant again, and my station's filling up with tables, and I realize I'm going to get overwhelmed with work. And, like I go through these cycles of similar themes in my dreams.
Hmm.
So active imagination for me was a way of bringing the full me to engage with that content as opposed to when I'm dreaming, when it seems like there's only half of me there.
Yeah, yeah. Because during a dream, again, we're a passive spectator in the process. We might make choices and take certain attitudes, but again, it's a passive thing. As you said, you can't actively engage with it. As you said, maybe I would make a different choice. I would have, taken a different course of action.
Okay, go ahead. Let's get into the procedure.
So I find interesting and helpful to have a few departure points because, yeah, you can empty your mind and just see what happens. And maybe something happens, maybe something doesn't. So I find that having departure points can be really helpful. The first one would be affects, which are strong emotional reactions. As I mentioned before, sometimes I have this tightness in my chest, sometimes I realize I can't breathe properly, and I just don't know why. It's just happening. So this would be an effect, this bodily sensations, something that, I don't know, boring you and you don't really know why. So you can focus on that during the process. So you can slow your breathing, be in a relaxed state and allow yourself to be fully taken by this effect. This would be the first step. Another departure point can be dream fragments or continue a dream. So a lot of time we have dreams that we don't remember or they don't have a resolution. So we can continue the dream during active imagination while we're awake and see, what happens from there. We can have a genuine question in our minds, something that's been bugging us and we want an answer, and we can start from there. We can have spontaneous fantasies. I don't know, sometimes we have this thing in your mind, just stuck in your mind. And sometimes you might have spontaneous fantasies that you have no idea why. Something just pops in your brain. You have a memory, you remember something, you see the image of something for whatever reason and you don't know why. And you can go from that. Or, as we discussed, we can go over a certain narrative or repeated pattern attached to these complexes. So I gave an example earlier, about having codependent behaviors. So we can connect with that, with this narrative, with this pattern, and try to see what's going on. This would be the departure points I find the most helpful. Well, once you choose your departure point, it's a really straightforward process. It's really simple. What is the most complex part is the psychological framework behind that we discussed in the beginning. So from that, we just have to allow this thing to come into our minds, arise as Barbara Hanna says, let a fantasy image arise from the unconscious into our field of inner perception. And again, we have to remember the psychic images have 4 layers. So it's very possible that we don't see anything. Sometimes we might see it. Sometimes we might hear words. Sometimes we only have bodily sensations. And that's all good. What matters is that we allow the unconscious mind to speak and we connect with it in whatever shape or form it comes to us. Again, we already discussed this, but these aspects tend to have a personified form. So when I allow this aspect to come forth, I might see a person. And here I can give you, another personal example here. I think this happened also about a couple of years ago. So this is what happened. At the time, I had hired this mentor to help me with a few things. And he wasn't really doing his job properly. When I contacted him, he said he could help me, but during the process, I understood that he couldn't. It was out of his area of expertise. And this obviously made me mad. I was angry at him, but I never showed it. I just pretended it wasn't bothering me as much as it was. So I was like, okay, whatever, not gonna engage with it, it is what it is. So that was the event. And this left this emotion, this effect inside of me. And I had this tightness in my chest. So what happens is that I sat to meditate a little, allowed this effect to come into my mind, and then I saw myself into this cave. And it was full with stalactites, these caves, and I saw this greenish light. And this greenish light was the figure of the Hulk. So there was the Hulk there, and I took a stalactite on my hand, and I cut it open, and it began to bleed. And I just heard in my mind, let it bleed. Now, upon further investigation, I also journed about it, tried to understand what it really meant. And a lot of memories come forth. The Hulk is a figure from my childhood, so it has the why, the cause. My personal associations with it was this anger, obviously that I wasn't showing, because I found it was improper, because I was avoiding conflicts. So I had this idea that conflicts and showing anger, showing this emotion, something bad, and basically I shouldn't do it. So that's why the Hulk took this form in my imagination. And this let it bleed, like the blood is the symbol for emotions, right? To allow things to come. But not only that, through my journaling, this figure, it's really interesting because the figures talk through the emotion. So this figure was really pissed at me. It's like a cursing, like saying, how come you didn't talk to this guy? Like, fuck this guy. So it really comes, in a very raw form, all of these emotions that were repressed. And it basically told me that I was trying to be too perfect, not allowing any emotions to come forth. And also, it asked me to compose a song with this experience. So over the course of, like a week, a few days, I would engage with this figure, I would talk to this figure, and I would go over a few memories, and from our conversations, a lyric from a song came to me. So I made a song about this experience. So that was my way of integrating this experience through this symbolic form, and obviously through changing my behavior from that point on. Again, the third phase, it consists of giving this image a form by writing down, painting it, sculpting it, writing as music, or dancing it. Again, I connect with my unconscious mostly through music. I can't paint, I'm horrible at it. So my version of the Red Book is like an album of songs. It's like through journaling. Jung knew how to paint, so he did that. I can't, that's not my thing. So that's why I say it's important to understand what is our unique way of connecting to the unconscious and what is the unique way these things want to come forth for you. For some people, it would be just journal, and that's completely fine. That's their way. For some people, it would be painting, and that's also fine. There's even dancing in it that can be achieved. So whatever is your thing, just go with it.
A quick note on that, Rafi, is uh, your typology can guide you toward what is your best mode for engaging with the unconscious, because there's the four mental functions, and Jung said that there is a superior function, meaning it is the predominant one that is used by the ego consciousness, and there is the inferior, and what that means is that it's less used. And he also said that the inferior function is the doorway to the unconscious, to what he would call the soul of the person, the deepest inner essence of them. So for me, as a highly intuitive person, I find that the sensation function is the one that is in the inferior position, and that what it means is that if I want to engage the deep inner part of me, I need to do it in an embodied physical sort of way. I spend a lot of time in my head, and I need to get out of my head when I want to engage with the unconscious. So for me, journaling and stuff like that is too rational. I write as a living, I'm an author. It brings too much of that rational mind to bear. So if you can understand your typology, at least what is your superior and inferior function, look at the inferior function and then use that as the mode. Because for me, obviously, it's very physical. But for other people who are sensation types in their superior position in the four types and how they configure in the psyche, then you would be the opposite for you. These things that are more visual, guided, journaling, rational, things like that might be a better path for you to be able to engage with the unconscious.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good tip. I'm also an intuitive type, but I'm an introverted intuitive type with thinking as an auxiliary function. And you see, you're extroverted intuitive type.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
good guess.
yeah.
uh,
So yeah, this can be helpful for sure. So yeah, continue. Since you mentioned the rational part of our minds, it's important that in this first part of the process, we don't judge anything. We just allow it to come. Because first, we have to allow the unconscious to take form. As Jung says, the unconscious contents want first of all to be seen clearly, which can only be done by giving them shape and to be judged only when everything they have to say is tangibly present. So what happens is first, try not to think. Just allow the unconscious to come. It's not the time yet to have the dialectical procedure. But once you allow the thing to talk through paper or in your mind, then you can ask questions. Then you can provide the perspective of your conscious mind, of your ego, and then you can reach an agreement with them. But it's very important that you don't judge what's coming from the unconscious and really allow it to come. Because otherwise, it's just you won't be fully engaged in the active imagination space. Jung also warns us about two common mistakes. There are some people that focus too much on the aesthetics. So let's say if you have this painting in your mind, you would be overly focused on the technical aspect of it. And this would kill the symbolic aspect of it. Because it would be, again, rationalizing, focusing too much on the technique and not really allowing the unconscious to come. Because when you are in this active imagination space, you enter into the automatic writing flow of things. When you are painting in the active imagination space, your hand also move like almost by itself. It has its own life. When I'm playing the active imagination space, I'm also not really thinking. My hand is just doing the thing. And obviously, this was a big problem for me in the beginning, because whenever a lyric would come to me or a sequence of chords, I would I would completely obsess over it because I studied music. So I'd be, okay, what is the function of this chord? What is a better way to do this? What candies do I have to use? Do I use a minor chord here? Do I use a major chord here? I would obsess over these details, and the unconscious just wouldn't come. And we also have the other side of things. People who tend to focus too much on the message and do a sloppy job. So you have this grandiose thing in your mind for a painting, for instance, this symbolism that came to you, and you don't take the time to shape it. You just, oh yeah, I know what it means, I know what happens. You just, I don't know, write it on a napkin and you don't really give blood to it. You don't invest yourself on it. And the fourth step would be moral confrontation with the material one has already produced. And at this point, Jung warns us of a mistake that is frequently made that jeopardizes the whole process. This mistake is entering into the active imagination space with a fictive ego. Again, we are not engaged in the process as we are. We try to fake a persona. So let's say we are not a person that tends to take many risks in their lives, but in your active imagination, you see yourself as this hero, and you kill dragons, and you save the princess, and you do all of these things that you would never do in real life. You're just faking it. That's not how you would act in real life. So it's very important that your personality is engaged in the process. If you're someone that tends to be more hesitant, then, well, when you meet in your figure, you have to take it seriously and act as if you would act in real life. Make choices as if you are choosing something in real life. Because otherwise, you're just pretending, just playing with it, and nothing will be accomplished.
And it should be noted that the unconscious is aware of these things when it engages with you. So it already knows. Like if you're being dishonest with yourself or with it knows, and it tends to just sort of shut down the whole procedure. So there's one thing that I've learned from Jung that is very important for active imagination and any sort of inner work is the authenticity, the willingness to come into that space and be and open yourself rather than trying to bring rather than trying to be something that you're not, or continue engaging a persona, projecting what you want to be as opposed to just bringing the real authentic you to that space.
Yeah, perfect.
So I want to say real quick here, I know that we have people who are running out of time. I was hoping that we could get to the demonstration here. I promised the group that we would do this in about 5 minutes, and that was a couple minutes ago. So if there's one more slide you want to go through, or if you want to go straight into a demonstration, and can you tell people also, Rafi, when they engage with the active imagination, what are the cautions or safeguards? I've heard it said that, Jung himself cautioned about doing this kind of work because there are certain personalities that maybe they don't need to go that deep because they might encounter things that would knock them off course in their regular life. In other words, it can lead to neurosis or worse. So do you have any words of caution before we go forward?
Well, yes, absolutely. The danger is really becoming psychotic with these processes. Because the active imagination space, it is a mild psychosis that you're entering. And if you're not careful, you can be overwhelmed by the unconscious. So that's why it's important that you honor the commitments you have in your daily life, and understand that active imagination is a tool to better live our lives and our relationships. If for some reason you are losing interest in your real life, you're doing something wrong. If you're not engaging in your relationships as much, you are doing something wrong. You're not integrating anything. It's just a intellectualization, mental masturbation. Because again, the most important step is how this image fits in our lives. And as a last example, my book, Demystifying Psychology, my book Pistis, it came to me in an active imagination session. I was journaling, and I was having this image about a sword, right? The sword is the symbol for the verb, the logos. And upon investigation, I understood that I had to write more. And in this process of writing more, I understood that I have to complete this book. So again, integrating the shadow is taking practical actions. It's not me, oh, all right, I have this sword on my mind and yeah, yay. Like this very childish way of relating to the unconscious. It's always how these things fit into our daily lives. So again, we have to honor our commitments in daily life. We have to understand the psychological framework to not be susceptible to this, to not go crazy, basically in a very simple way. We have to also learn how to emotionally regulate first before undertaking these practices. So let's say have good habits, take care of your body, be connected with your real life, do your work properly, be in your relationships as well. Never do anything that will make you disconnect from real life. So if you're honoring your agreements, you are someone that knows how to emotionally regulate if you get overwhelmed, and you understand the basic aspects of dream analysis, how to treat the unconscious fantasies, and you know that to integrate something, you need to take practical action in daily life, then I'm hesitant to, it's like for most people, probably it would be fine. But the thing is that many people have a latent psychosis and they don't know about it. And then when they engage in this process, this can come true. And this is not pretty. I mean, I worked with many people experiencing psychosis in this past 3 years. And it's way more common than people imagine. People have this image that people are in like mental hospitals and are really losing it. But psychosis is a very normal thing. And you probably know someone in your life that had the psychotic experiences, but they bring a lot of shame. So that's why we don't tend to talk about it. But again, it's a very normal thing.
Okay, thank you for that. You could you lead us into, now that it's we're almost 75 minutes in, so um, I would like to get us to this place. I have your website listed here where people can talk with you more about this. And if they think that they need some help with active imagination in a more therapeutic setting, they can come see you, because you will recognize if they're going off the deep end with this. Um, and also, I teach a lot of this in my live classes that I teach at Dream School, and I put something in the chat which shows the November course to help to engage with dream images and be in the right place to be able to do that personally. So I can also teach some of these skills to you. So between the two of us, we should be able to uh, guide people safely into engagement with the unconscious and then come back to their regular life and live it in a way that it doesn't blow them off course because something comes up from the unconscious that just, has such energy and affect that they can no longer function normally.
Yeah, well, since we are on a Zoom call, I think the safest way to do this would be trying to achieve this state of automatic writing. Because in my opinion, this is the safest way to practice that, especially because I'm not in touch with anyone here. Cameras are off. Like I don't know about their experiences, their past, or anything. And I don't usually guide people in this way in active imagination, because I teach them how they can access, like 101, how can they reach these states, and then they can practice on their own, and we discuss their experiences and their fantasies on the therapeutic setting. So basically they have their experiences and we talk it over, like you did this right, you didn't do this, let's see how this fits in your life, and they I give a few pointers and then they can go over it.
Yeah, let's just I want them to be able to reach that space. If for the participants here, this was the goal, was to get them to the door and then they can decide what to do from there. But what would you do if you had 5 or 10 minutes to drop into the space where now you're ready to engage with the unconscious through active imagination? What would be your procedure?
Well, nowadays my procedure is very straightforward. I just listen to my bodily sensations, mostly my body, because sensations might fear in function. So I try to connect with my body as most as I can. So if I perceive some tightness in my chest, I perceive something weird going on with me, an emotional reaction, I'll just slow my breathing, maybe close my eyes, allow myself to be taken by the sensation. And when I perceive that the sensation is kind of growing on me, then this would be the moment that maybe I would see an image on my mind, or maybe I'll just get pen and paper and I'll just allow my hand to start writing. Again, it's a very simple procedure. So we can close our eyes, take a few deep breaths, try to focus on the air going through your nose and the sensation that you experience when the air goes out. Experience the sensation of the air filling your lungs and the sensation when it goes out. Just focus on it for a few moments. Now, you might scan your body to some tightness. Maybe you have some tightness on your chest, on your shoulders. Maybe there's something that is bothering you at this moment. That's fine. Just breathe. Focus on the sensation. If there's an image that appears, try to focus on it. And just be with it for a moment. Just allow the sensations and these experiences to take your whole body. And just breathe and stay with this sensation for a moment. When you see yourself fully taken by the sensation, now perhaps you already have an image on your mind. You can just ask, why is it there? What it wants? Maybe you can hear a name, a few words, maybe some memories will pop. And with these figures, you can have a little conversation, ask a few questions. Or maybe your hand just starts writing something. And just be with the experience for a few more moments. Now, since we have a limited time here, it's the time to wrap it up, maybe say goodbye. Maybe tell this figure that you will come back later. You will make time for this experience later to understand what it wants. Maybe you can ask for some piece of advice. And you can slowly come back. You can feel your hands again. You can feel your feet on the floor. You can feel yourself sitting on your chair and coming back to the present moment. Just engaging with your body. Slowly open your eyes, coming back to this presentation. And if someone wants to share something, wants to ask any questions.
So I have a
Well,
question here. Are your eyes open when you are doing this? Does the act of writing engage or disengage you? And how do you manage that?
when I'm writing, yes, my eyes are open, but it's automatic writing.
So your hand is just kind of moving, and this tells you that having a pen and a notepad there, you can do it as these things come to you. And I think that as you learn the procedure, that you can, if you feel like writing is going to take you out of the flow, that you can just have the notepad there nearby for when you're done with the session, and then you can write down the notes.
Yeah,
Um,
sure, sure,
I use my
sure.
dream journal because I don't like keeping a separate journal for everything, but my dream journal becomes also my active imagination journal. Um, and let's see, does the writing engage or disengage you? For me, it's become more engaging. For me, it's like dream journaling in the way that by writing, physically writing right after I've woken up from a dream, takes me back into the dream space in a way that's different than if I take down voice notes or type in a computer or something like that. So, for anyone who's interested in this, um, as far as engagement with with these contents, you can do it in in your normal waking state. But as Rafi just showed, you're also getting yourself very relaxed and focused at the same time. And I wanted to make sure everyone saw his 5 keys to stimulating the unconscious. Um, and these are things that you can explore on your own. I've done Julia Cameron's The Artist Way.
Oh, you did.
Wonderful book. It teaches you to get into the flow. I've done Yoga Nidra, or heard it pronounced different ways, and also the lateralization, which can be done through tapping. And basically, you're trying to coordinate or synchronize the two sides of your mind. I use something from, it's called Sacred Acoustics. Yeah, sacredacoustics.com. They have binaural beats with other sounds that are in these audio files that you play, usually with headphones or earbuds. And you can spend about 10 or 20 minutes with these. And what it will actually do is synchronize your brain into the brainwave state that is most conducive for active imagination, which, according to what I've experienced and what I've read, is the theta state, which is basically meditative. The theta state is deep creativity and light meditation. And you can get this at, it's called Whole States at Sacred Acoustics. Get the Theta program. I think it costs about $10. And you can play this before you engage or as you engage in the active imagination session. And the binaural beats will actually synchronize the two hemispheres of your brain. What's the hat example, the ritual? I have
Oh,
one, by
yeah.
the way, where I drop down into myself. Jung said that the first time this happened to him, he gave himself over. He was experiencing this really difficult period. He said he gave himself over and dropped down within himself, and he saw himself like an animal burrowing into the ground. And he burrowed and burrowed and burrowed, and he dropped down into this chamber. And when I did the first time active imagination really clicked with me, the same thing happened. I started off thinking of myself digging into the ground, but then the imagery became spontaneous. It was a lot like a dream. And I found myself in this deep underground chamber, where I was able to then engage with this figure that was waiting for me. And he basically asked me to sit with him and meditate. And we just sat there and stared eye to eye with each other. And as I stayed in that space and blocked everything else out, like I'm in this chamber deep under this mountain, looking at this holy figure, we started communicating like without even words. It was just feelings and looking into his eyes and feeling his presence. And for me, that was when it really kicked off. Um,
Yeah.
There is
Do you
another
have?
question here from Martin that I'll address after we get done here. So go ahead, Rafi. Anything else you want to add? You have the ritual hat example. I was curious if you could tell us what that means.
Oh, yeah. So basically, for some reason, the unconscious responds really well to rituals. So you can create a very simple ritual like lighting a candle, making some tea, putting on some music, something that you do always in the same way. Because the signals that you want the unconscious to be stimulated, both for starting and both for finishing. So it makes it easier, this transition to the active imagination space to your real life afterwards. And this example is one shared by Robert Johnson, that he mentions this guy that had a special hat for his active imagination experiences. So whenever it was time to enter the active imagination space, he would put his hat, he would do his thing, and then he would take it off and continue with his day.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, what a way of physically cueing yourself. When you feel that hat go on your head, you're physically cueing yourself to go into the active imagination space.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that use of ritual for great suggestion. Before we wrap up, is there anything that you want to add to this?
Let's see. Well, let's see. The 5 keys. Again, if you have difficulty seeing images in your mind, I think the easiest way to do this is, again, with automatic writing. And you do that by just writing anything that comes in your mind, really stream of consciousness. You have to create the habit of just taking pen and paper and writing as fast as you can everything that's passing through your mind, every thought, everything. Don't worry about punctuation, like commas, nothing. Just allow what's in your mind to go to the paper. And as you create this habit over time, you will start noticing your hand writing fast and engaging in automatic writing. So I'd say that's the easiest way to start engaging with it, because you're signaling that the unconscious can talk, signaling that the unconscious can speak. And from this material that comes, then you go over the process we discussed earlier about the why, the what for, understand that it's a complex talking through you, having this dialogue with this thing that is talking to you. So this is basically it. The active imagination procedure is very simple. What can make it complex is understand the framework, the psychological framework we use to interpret these experiences.
Excellent. Excellent. And this is something we do have one more question in the chat here. Any advice if you don't dream or don't remember dreams due to trauma?
Yeah, uh, this automatic writing, but also find a therapist.
Yeah.
He'll be able to help you.
And Rafi, you do trauma work. I know I've seen that on your website, and I did drop a link to that. The question, what I found is that it's not that you're not dreaming, it's that you're not remembering. Okay, so
Yeah.
and one of the ways that I found this helpful is because I've been through periods of complete blank spots when with my dream life, and I started wondering, well, am I dreaming at all? And I actually had advice from a therapist who said, well, when you wake up, see if there's anything that strikes you as a dreamlike experience. You don't have to remember the actual memories of the dream. Just see if something from the time you went to the sleep until the time you woke up, was there anything in there that even feels like you had some kind of experience? We don't even have to call it a dream. Was there anything happening? And as you can answer, what it does is if you go, well, yeah, actually, there was something happening. I don't remember it, but I know that it wasn't just a complete blank spot from the time I went to sleep until I woke up. And what it does is it answers the question for you. Oh, I am really dreaming. Now it's a matter of remembering. Now, if trauma is blocking you from remembering dreams, then do you think, Rafi, that it might be that there's content in those dreams that you just don't want to have to deal with? You're deliberately sort of blanking out those memories. You don't want to remember the dreams. You're avoiding them because of the content of them, or is there a different way of looking at it?
I wouldn't say that a person is avoiding, but one explanation is maybe the person experienced some form of depersonalization. She's not really engaged with the body and the practical aspects of life. She's not connected with the present moment. So therefore she can't remember the experiences, as you mentioned. Because again, the conscious and unconscious have this compensatory and complementary relationship. So it reacts to our conscious mind. So sometimes we have to take action in real life to start stimulating the unconscious again.
Good. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah, stimulating the unconscious, especially for this, through these procedures that you've gone over here, and there are other ways of doing it. Will basically, Rafi, what I found is that the unconscious loves when you give it attention because it sits there in the background for most of your life. It is fully aware of everything going on, waking life, sleep life, and it wants to engage with you. So when you come to a space and say, "Talk with me," the unconscious is like, "Oh, hell yeah." Like, thank you. I'm ready to engage with you anytime you're ready to engage with me. So we've got some thank yous here from much appreciated for the advice and lecture, and thank you, Raf. Um, yeah, thank you for doing this. I hope that you'll do it again. Office hours every Saturday going into November. Thanksgiving, we're off that week. And then going into December too, there will be more live courses. I'll make an announcement at r/Jung if we can do this again, if you're willing to. I know you're a busy person, but thank you for giving your time for us here. Um,
No,
yeah,
yeah.
I don't know if you're seeing the chat, but we're getting a lot of people who are leaving their thanks for you.
Hmm.
And let me say that also, that my thanks for you.